Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Forbes senior contributor, Robert Farrington. Robert, I appreciate you coming on today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
As you know, there has been a ton of confusion the past year surrounding student loans, all the announcements, all the updates, everything in between. Can you give us the highlight reel?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone is kind of waiting, with their breath held to see if student loan forgiveness, the 10,000 or 20,000 is going to happen. The problem is we're waiting on the Supreme Court and they're going to hear the arguments later in February. But that doesn't mean that borrowers should expect to hear an answer in February. Usually the Supreme Court is going to take several months to create their opinion. And that's going to push us close to summer before we know whether the $10,000 or $20,000 in loan forgiveness would happen. And at the same token, student loan payments may be restarting this year. I say maybe because we've heard the word final several times at this point in time, but allegedly this will be the final payment pause, which means borrowers might get bad news and might have to restart student loan payments later this year.
Like you said, the biggest headlines have been debt cancellation and these pauses. So I do want to break down debt cancellation a little further. How is this legal battle looking for the Biden administration? Because you said we won't hear answers potentially till summer. That's a while.
It is a while. And, I think a lot of borrowers are worried about what's going to happen. And honestly, it doesn't look great for the Biden administration when it comes to student loan forgiveness. They are using the HEROES Act, which depends on the COVID-19 state of emergency, as their legal basis for student loan debt cancellation. And they're facing a conservative, majority Supreme Court. As a result, this, could be seen as a stretch of their powers and something that they're not allowed to do. On the flip side, many student loan advocates and borrower groups say that this is legal and they could do it. So there is definitely still hope for student loan borrowers, but borrowers shouldn't be counting on that cancellation, in their personal financial plans.
Let's talk some hypotheticals here. What happens if the Supreme Court strikes down this program?
It's very likely that they do strike down this program, which means borrowers are in the status quo. I mean, their loan situation is the same that it's been. However, borrowers haven't had to make student loan payments since March of 2020, which is a huge relief. And, considering the average student loan payment is about $300 a month, most borrowers have seen well over $10,000 in not having to make payments at this point in time. Furthermore, the student loan payment pause has given borrowers credits to other student loan forgiveness programs like public service loan forgiveness. Public service loan forgiveness, if requires 10 years or a 120 payment count to get loan forgiveness. Well, at this point in time, borrowers have already made it a third of the way towards their goal of student loan forgiveness. So while some hope may be dwindling on the blanket $10,000 or $20,000 cancellation, there are a lot of other great benefits that borrowers have currently received and may receive in the future.
And let's say the court does find this perfectly legal. Will borrowers be instantly impacted?
Yeah, borrowers should see relief very quickly. Remember, the Biden administration took all those applications before, everything got held up in the courts. So there are millions of borrowers who have already submitted their applications. And if it does go through, my guess would be that borrowers would see that cancellation wiped off their loans probably within 2 months or so. Remember, we're still talking about the government, so things do take time.
Now let's talk about that payment pause. It has been paused since March of 2020 when then President Trump enacted that pause. Since then, both Trump and Biden have extended that pause. Should borrowers expect that pause to be lifted this year?
I'm very, it's a maybe. We can say that right now. It's a maybe. I am leaning towards yes, we will probably see student loan payments resume this year. However, there is a slim chance that the payment pause could be extended again. The problem is that they're using the state of emergency as their justification for the payment pause. And the Biden administration announced that the state of emergency will be ending in May of this year. That means that they will no longer have the powers to extend the payment pause. That doesn't mean, though, between, April and May, they don't push it out one last time and say maybe we're going to go a year or something longer. However, I think most borrowers should be planning on the student loan payments resuming at some point this year.
How should people start planning now? I mean, they haven't been paying this back since March of 2020. So that's 3 years without these payments. If they resume in June, what would you recommend people start doing now to prepare?
Honestly, not only have people not been making payments, roughly 20% of all student loan borrowers have never made a payment on their student loan because they've graduated in the last few years, and they've never even had to do this. So borrowers need to look at what their monthly payment would be. They need to log in to studentaid.gov and see what their repayment plan options, understand where their loans are. And most importantly, they need to make sure that their loan servicer has their correct information so that they don't miss a billing statement or any notifications about their student loans. The worst thing that could happen is that you kind of ignore everything going on with your student loans, payments start to resume, and you suddenly find yourself in delinquency or default because you missed an email or you missed a letter because you didn't update your information. However, if payments do resume, make sure you're budgeting that payment into your monthly budget. And that might also mean like looking at different repayment plan options like income-driven repayment or other options.
This is a lot of news surrounding student loans and borrowing, things like that. Is there any other updates borrowers should be looking out for?
I mean, there are a lot of changes happening with student loans beyond the payment pause and student loan forgiveness. We have changes to borrower defense to repayment. We have a new potential student loan repayment plan coming this fall. We have the Fresh Start initiative, which is helping borrowers who were in default prior to the pandemic. They get a fresh start where they can get out of delinquency or default if they take certain actions with their student loans. And there's also been changes to the way the government is handling bankruptcy and student loan debt. So even if you were counting on this blanket student loan forgiveness, realize that there actually might be other ways for you to get help with your student loans with all of these new different initiatives that are coming.
Can you dive into that a little deeper? What is the government doing regarding bankruptcy and student loan debt? What are those changes?
Absolutely. So one of the big myths with student loans is that they could never be forgiven in bankruptcy. And that has always been a myth, but it's not true. Student loans can be forgiven in bankruptcy. It's just very rare because you have to show undue hardship that making these student loan payments would just be way too difficult based on your financial situation. And when you look at things like an income-driven repayment plan, your loan payment could be $0 per month. So when a judge looks at that and they say, well, there's no undue hardship here because you're at $0 a month and then your loan could be forgiven in the future, why do we need to discharge it in bankruptcy? However, there were some people that kind of fell through the cracks. Maybe they had other types of debt, medical debt, things like that, that those payments were an undue hardship. Well, the new changes to bankruptcy basically says that the Department of Education is not going to fight you on getting your loans discharged in bankruptcy anymore. So if you actually did file for bankruptcy discharge with your student loans, you still have to show an undue hardship, but the government's not going to challenge it anymore, which is a big relief for borrowers, and it might see more borrowers qualify for bankruptcy discharge.
There's a lot going on here regarding student loan news. What has the response been from borrowers?
Mass confusion. There is so many different moving parts. There's so much uncertainty. Even things like the repayment pause, we're going to start them, we're going to stop them. They don't tell you until 20 days before like payments are due. It's been extremely confusing for borrowers. I really hope the Department of Education, when payments do restart, the Supreme Court resolves this, really takes some time to reflect how they're communicating with borrowers and put together a cohesive plan so that borrowers know when to restart payments, what their payment's going to be. They need to really communicate this better because it has been nothing but maybe a year and a half of really confusing communications.
And there's definitely a lot of moving parts to all of this, depending on what type of borrower you are, what's your income, and everything like that. But what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to borrowers?
The number one thing is to get organized. You have to know what you have. The average student loan borrower actually has 5 different loans, right? Because you took one out every single year of college, freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, maybe a summer semester or another year of college. And they all might be at different loan servicers. So you need to track down where your student loans are. You need to find out what you owe. And then you need to make sure your contact information is updated. Finally, you need to understand your repayment plan options. So when student loan payments do restart, find the one that's most affordable for you. That could be an income-driven repayment plan, things like that, which require you to take another step of certifying your income with your loan servicer. But by doing all those things, you can be ready for when student loan payments do resume, probably this fall.
Robert Farrington, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.